We'll begin with the opening statements of the chairman and ranking member. Yesterday, FBI Director Christopher Wray testified before the House Judiciary Committee that the open southern border poses a huge security risk for our nation, his words, and that they have tracked a significant increase in crime, criminal cartel activity, and gang-related cartels because of this crisis. More than 5.5 million illegal aliens have been encountered at the southwest border since Joe Biden became president. Over 2.1 million illegal aliens at the border have been released into the United States in that same period of time. And more than 1.5 million known gotaways have evaded law enforcement and entered the country since January of 2021. Among the 1.5 million known gotaways, there is no way to estimate the number of terrorists and criminals entering the country. But we do know this. By surrendering to Border Patrol, you're virtually assured now of being released into the country. The 1.5 million who have evaded Border Patrol have done so for a reason. They're either conducting criminal activity or they're hiding criminal records. Adding to this threat is the fact that the administration has essentially adopted the sanctuary policies that prevent many dangerous illegal aliens from being deported after they have been convicted and incarcerated for committing other crimes while in the United States. According to Mr. Mayorkas's enforcement priorities, quote, whether a non-citizen poses a current threat to public safety is not to be determined according to bright lines or categories. So much for the rule of law. The result of such prioritization is that few criminal aliens are arrested and removed. The numbers speak for themselves. In fiscal year 2020, the last year of the Trump administration, ICE removed 186,000 aliens from the United States. 2 years into the Biden administration, deportations have plunged to only 72,000. That's a decline of more than 60%. The Trump administration removed 104,000 convicted criminals from the country in fiscal year 2020, yet the Biden administration only removed 38,000 in fiscal year 2022. Now that requires repeating. The number of convicted criminal aliens removed from our country has declined by nearly 2/3 under this administration. Similarly, in 2020, the Biden administration removed just 60% of the number of known or suspected gang members, as the Trump administration had done just 2 years prior. Now explain to me how this makes our communities safer. Does anyone seriously believe that making it harder to remove criminal illegal aliens from our communities makes our communities safer? Does anyone really believe that letting millions of unvetted foreign nationals into our communities makes our communities safer? Many of these aliens arrive deeply indebted to the cartels, whose affiliated gangs follow them into our communities to enforce those debts, often by pressing them into drug trafficking and human trafficking. The cartel massacre of an entire family just hit Tulare, California, a rural community not far from my district. The cartels are here because we have let them in. And as Director Wray testified yesterday, we have no idea how many terrorists have now entered the country as well. But crimes committed by criminal aliens aren't just statistics. Every crime devastates the victims of it and their families and their neighborhoods and their communities, as we will hear today. The sexual assault of a 3-year-old at a Chicago McDonald's. The sexual assault and murder of a 92-year-old woman in Queens, New York. The murder of a college student in Iowa. The sexual assault and murder of a 20-year-old girl in Maryland. The assault of a teenage girl in Alabama. The assault and robbery of 2 friends at a Maryland park. The attempted abduction of a 4-year-old girl in Virginia. The murder of a 15-year-old boy in Maryland. And the list goes on in heartbreaking detail. These democratic policies might create sanctuaries for criminal illegal aliens, but they are creating a dystopian nightmare for law-abiding citizens and non-citizens alike who must live in them. And now we have a new phenomenon, crime tourism. In the past several years, criminal gangs, largely from Chile, have exploited the visa waiver program to shake once quiet communities across the United States. With multi-million-dollar heists from Southern California to Florida and burglaries of family homes from New York to Virginia, these criminal aliens continue their crime sprees across the country. And in sanctuary jurisdictions, they largely escape accountability. Today, our witnesses will describe these real-life, everyday consequences of crimes that would not occur at all, save for the fact that we are not enforcing our immigration laws. If we simply enforce those laws, there'd be fewer criminal aliens in the country and fewer crimes committed by them. It is that simple. And I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by just taking a moment to express my deepest condolences to Mr. Rosenberg. You have experienced a profound loss, and I am so sorry for that, and I appreciate your coming to share Drew's story with us today. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to see that we're having an immigration hearing that's not solely focused on the border, but unfortunately I worry that today's hearing will feature more of the same dangerous and harmful rhetoric that some of my colleagues use to demonize and scapegoat immigrants. For the last 6 months, and really since President Biden took office, my colleagues have fear-mongered about the border and asylum seekers seeking refuge. This reached a fever pitch in May when the administration was set to end Title 42 public health policy. We were told that ending this policy that's supposed to be about public health and not about immigration would result in high numbers of migrants coming across the border and that the administration was not prepared to deal with the influx. But there was no influx. Like it or not, President Biden's border plan appears to be working. Over the past 2 months, border numbers have fallen nearly 70%, despite every projection to the contrary. Politico has called it the migrant crisis that still hasn't arrived. So, unable to further stoke fears about the border, my colleagues then turned to discussing the potential impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas during a hearing last month, and I was very pleased to see that following the hearing, some of our Republican colleagues on the committee, including the chairman of this subcommittee, expressed appropriate reservations about impeaching the secretary. I hope that my colleagues will realize that we can disagree about immigration policy without resorting to impeachment. Unable to move farther down the path on impeachment in this committee handed off that investigation to the House Homeland Security Committee. And now it appears that my Republican colleagues are pivoting to painting immigrants as criminals. As we discussed at our last hearing, Congress has never appropriated and no administration has ever requested sufficient resources to detain all non-citizens who fall under the, quote, mandatory detention categories. Even former President Trump never tried to detain all migrants. In fact, DHS's own data shows over 500,000 releases at the US-Mexico border under the Trump administration. Likewise, no administration has ever requested or been provided the resources to remove all undocumented non-citizens. There are currently about 11 million undocumented individuals in the United States. And given the Department of Homeland Security's finite resources, prosecutorial discretion is an essential tool in managing the immigration system. When President Biden took office, his administration moved to implement a targeted set of enforcement priorities. These priorities, while not perfect, attempt to focus finite resources on the removal of individuals deemed to be a threat to public safety, national security, or border security. Although this was initially blocked in the lower courts, in June, the Supreme Court held that states cannot challenge the executive branch's authority to establish enforcement priorities. And the court also ruled that courts do not have the authority to order law enforcement to carry out arrests and deportation. The Biden administration has stated that it plans to re-implement these enforcement priorities. Prosecutorial discretion in enforcement has long been an essential element of the executive branch's authority. And I am glad that the Biden administration and the Department of Homeland Security can move forward with immigration enforcement priorities. However, I do remain concerned about the administration's reliance on state and local law enforcement to carry out immigration enforcement. Local law enforcement needs to have the trust of all members of the community, including immigrants, to do their jobs. But that trust is eroded when local law enforcement is tasked with enforcing federal immigration policy. The Major Cities Chiefs Association has previously noted that if law enforcement officers are viewed by members of the immigrant community as colluding or working with immigration law enforcement officers, this would, quote, result in increased crime against immigrants in the broader community, create a class of silent victims, and eliminate the potential for assistance from immigrants in solving crimes or preventing future terrorist acts, end quote. The Major Cities Chiefs Association has also explained that cooperation with the immigrant community is a crucial part of solving crime and preventing further criminal activity within the entire community. Congress recognized this dynamic with strong bipartisan support when we created the U-Visa program to protect immigrant victims and witnesses of crime, to encourage those immigrants to come forward, report crimes, and cooperate with law enforcement to solve crimes. It's worth noting that when local law enforcement is deputized to enforce federal immigration law, it makes it far more difficult for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault to seek protection, and it empowers their abusers. So I'm sure we will hear a lot about immigrants and crime today, demonizing all immigrants and attempting to scare the public while using white nationalist rhetoric is straight out of Stephen Miller, and former President Trump's playbook. The reality is immigrants commit crimes at lower levels, and this type of rhetoric only fuels a rising hate that we have seen against immigrant communities. I do want to note that one of the witnesses is here to discuss Chilean nationals potentially abusing the visa waiver program. If any immigrant is abusing the immigration system, I think we all agree this is something that DHS should be looking into. The visa waiver program is a privilege that we award to certain countries. It is not a right. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today and the perspectives that they bring on this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to start by offering my condolences to Mr. Rosenberg. No parent should ever have to go through the pain of losing a child. I thank you for sharing Drew's story with the committee today. Mr. Chairman, today's hearing is on a topic that requires delicacy and nuance, two things the current House majority has struggled with in the past. No one on this dais wants dangerous criminals out on the streets, regardless of their immigration status. But we have to be careful not to paint all immigrants with a broad brush. Implying that all undocumented immigrants are criminals who wish to harm our country only lends credence to conspiracy theories that have already taken far too many lives. Next month, we will commemorate the anniversary of the El Paso shooting. On August 3rd, 2019, a domestic terrorist walked into a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, and murdered 23 people and injured 22 others. He posted a hateful and racist manifesto online prior to the attack, espousing white nationalist theories like the Great Replacement theory and claiming that there was a Hispanic invasion. He told investigators that he was targeting Mexicans. Last week, the shooter was sentenced to 90 consecutive life sentences by a federal judge. But no time in prison will help those grieving families get their loved ones back, nor will it help heal the physical, mental, and emotional wounds of the survivors. And it won't stop the next attack. It is for this reason that we must tread carefully. This is an important topic, and I look forward to a spirited debate with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. But we cannot add fuel to a fire that has already left so much devastation in its wake. We all want to protect our country. We all want to keep people safe. We have different ways of achieving that goal. The administration takes our national security very seriously. That is why they put in place enforcement guidelines that, while not perfect, attempt to prioritize the removal of dangerous individuals. The previous administration chose to paint everyone with a broad brush. The Trump administration created a set of priorities that was so expansive, it included all undocumented and otherwise removable immigrants in the country. A jaywalker and a murderer were given the same degree of prioritization for removal. ICE started targeting people wherever they could find them, near schools, hospitals, and even at houses of worship. Undocumented immigrants who had been complying with ICE for decades would arrive at the regular check-ins and be placed into immigration detention without warning. People became afraid of law enforcement and afraid of continuing to work with ICE for fear that they too would be detained and removed. When everyone is a target, no one feels safe. Targeting undocumented immigrants who posed no threat to the country had consequences. During President Trump's time in office, the number of individuals in immigration detention who had been convicted of serious felonies fell by 20%. But during that same time, the numbers of detained immigrants grew, and soon immigrants with no criminal conviction at all became the majority of detainees in ICE custody. When President Biden took office, he directed DHS to prioritize targeting individuals who pose a threat to national security, public safety, and border security. President Trump chose to target everyone. As a result, his administration detained fewer people who committed serious crimes. President Biden's goal was to use our finite resources to prioritize detaining and removing those who pose the biggest threats to us. Unfortunately, Republican state attorneys general who disagreed with this goal sued to block the implementation of these priorities. In 2022, the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Texas enjoined the policy, forcing the administration to revert to the previous administration's priorities or lack thereof. Last month, in an 8-1 decision, the Supreme Court overturned the injunction, ruling that it was the executive branch's prerogative to set enforcement priorities and that the administration could once again move forward with them. Now that the administration is once again allowed to set its own priorities, we will be able to see which approach will be more effective. I thank the witnesses for coming today. I look forward to hearing their testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. Let me now introduce today's witnesses. Our first witness is Bradley Schoenleben. Mr. Schoenleben is a senior deputy district attorney with the Orange County, California District Attorney's Office. In 2017, the California District Attorney Investigators Association recognized him as California Prosecutor of the Year. More recently, Mr. Schoenleben has helped to prosecute cases related to theft and burglary by organized criminal alien gangs. He has a law degree from Chapman University's Dale E. Fowler School of Law. Our next witness will be Mr. John Fabricatore. Mr. Fabricatore is an advisory board member with the National Immigration Center for Enforcement. He started with the Immigration and Naturalization Service in 1998 and retired from the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement in 2022. He served in many different positions, including Deputy Field Office Director for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the Denver, Colorado area of responsibility, before being promoted to Field Office Director in 2020. He also received the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security Silver Medal for Meritorious Service Award. Our third witness is Chief Ramon Batista. Mr. Batista is Chief of Police for the City of Santa Monica, California, a position he's held since October 2021. He began his law enforcement career with the Tucson, Arizona Police Department in 1986. In 2017, Mr. Batista was appointed police chief in Mesa, Arizona. Mr. Batista has a bachelor's degree and master's degree from Grand Canyon University. And finally, we will hear from Mr. Donald Rosenberg. Mr. Rosenberg is the founder of Advocates for Victims of Illegal Alien Crime. After an illegal alien driving without a license killed his son, Drew, in 2010, Mr. Rosenberg founded the organization to raise awareness of crimes committed by aliens who are in the United States illegally. Mr. Rosenberg is a former entertainment and publishing executive who lives in Southern California. We welcome our witnesses and thank them for appearing today. And we'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief? So help you God. Great. Let the record reflect the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may be seated. Now, please know that your written testimony will be entered in the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we'd ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, and we'll begin with Mr. Schoenleben.
Thank you, Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, Ranking Member Nadler, and distinguished members of this committee. I'm both humbled and honored to be in front of all of you today. Members, there is a loophole in the Department of Homeland Security's ESTA visa waiver program that has allowed hundreds of thousands of Chilean nationals, including violent criminals, into the United States without the required criminal background checks. In just 2022, over 350,000 Chilean nationals entered the United States utilizing the ESTA visa waiver program. Failure to provide the criminal background checks has created a direct pipeline between the United States and Chile for transnational organized crime rings to shuttle convicted criminals into the United States for the sole purpose of committing residential and commercial burglaries, follow home robberies, and thefts. Americans across the country are being unknowingly surveilled and stalked in their own homes, the very place they should feel the safest. In fact, in Ventura County, California, a staggering 76% of Chilean nationals arrested since 2019 entered the United States through the ESTA program. In a June 15th, 2023 letter to Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer, Juan Gabriel Valdez, ambassador of Chile to the United States, essentially admitted that his country was failing to provide the necessary criminal history for visa waiver applicants. Criminal history prohibits an applicant from being granted an ESTA visa waiver. Organized crime rings have seized this opportunity to train, recruit, and deploy highly organized and sophisticated teams of burglars across the United States to break into Americans' homes and businesses. And make no mistake, these criminals deploy sophisticated surveillance teams, high-tech tools such as Wi-Fi jammers, cell phone jammers, electronic trackers, and fake IDs to perfect their art of committing crime and eluding capture. Organized crime rings law enforcement agencies across the nation have raised alarms about the Chilean nationals' abuse of ESTA, including Nassau County, New York, Flagler County, Florida, Shelby County, Alabama, Williamson County, Tennessee, and Los Angeles, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura counties in California. In fact, right now, the FBI is currently working with over 750 different law enforcement agencies across the country on this very issue. Orange County, California is simply a microcosm of the issue being experienced as a result of transnational organized criminals entering the United States through the ESTA visa waiver program. A target-rich environment combined with California's soft-on-crime policies and federal failures to verify criminal histories for Chilean visa waiver applicants have created the perfect storm for crime. Without criminal histories, courts are incapable of determining the true risk posed by these offenders, resulting in release decisions and sentences ignorant of the dangers actually posed. California's sanctuary state status only compounds the threat. We know that transnational criminals, including Colombian nationals, are intentionally being arrested at the border to gain entry into the United States, knowing they will be released quickly, and upon release, they commit crimes such as residential burglary and so on. And they utilize military-style equipment, such as ghillie suits, to hide in the brush behind Americans' homes, trackers to track victims to and from work to utilize and maximize their window of opportunity. With easy access to the United States and no punishment, the reward far outweighs the risk. An Orange County victim of these crimes recently talked about the messages that her children gave her after being victimized by that crime. She said she told the court that her children told her the following: "I'm afraid to play basketball in the backyard. I'm not going to go upstairs by myself because someone may be up there. I'm afraid of the dark. I'm so frightened that every light in the house has to be on all night long." Her triplets are 14 years old and they are afraid of the dark because this family now knows the terror that happens when lights go out. In failing to hold Chile accountable for refusing to provide the required criminal background checks, the Department of Homeland Security has failed in its duty to protect the safety and security of our nation and our citizens. The Secretary of Homeland Security has statutory authority to immediately terminate or suspend a country's designation in the ESTA visa waiver program without notice if there's a credible threat originating from that country which poses an imminent danger to the United States or its citizens. Members, on behalf of Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer and law enforcement across the country, I respectfully ask participation for Chile in the ESTA visa program be suspended until Chile meets with the program requirements. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Next is Mr. Fabricatore.
Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present testimony on the current state of immigration enforcement. After decades serving at ICE, I feel compelled to testify today about the erosion of immigration enforcement and lack of respect for the rule of law. Every American should be concerned about what the Biden administration is doing. Their current policies are putting our communities at risk and negatively affecting public safety and national security. Right out the gate, Secretary Mayorkas began to gut interior immigration enforcement with extremely narrow enforcement priorities for ICE. He justified it on the false premise that ICE couldn't effectively enforce the law due to a lack of resources. ICE statistics paint a grim picture of the effects of these priorities. If you compare ICE arrests from 2018 to 2020, civil arrests are down 69%. Convicted criminal arrests are down 65%. Everything from homicide to assaults to weapons offenses are down as high as 61%. There are fewer criminals being arrested, plain and simple. I would further note that there are hundreds of thousands of criminal aliens at large in the United States. The Biden administration has stated that there are over 400,000 convicted criminals on the non-detained docket. Why aren't they a priority? Furthermore, recidivist rates have shown from prior fiscal year reports that most criminal aliens have additional criminal convictions. In 2020, the 93,000 criminal aliens arrested by ERO with criminal histories accounted for 374,000 criminal charges and convictions, about 4 per alien. Even with the paltry number of arrests made in 2022, the 46,000 aliens arrested with criminal histories accounted for nearly 200,000 convictions and charges. If the Biden administration conducted interior enforcement against criminal illegal aliens in the same manner as was always done in the prior Republican and Democrat administrations I served in, there would have been another 90,000 aliens arrested who would have accounted for approximately another 300,000 convictions and charges. As an ICE field office director, I witnessed the deterioration of relationships with local law enforcement agencies because of sanctuary policies. Nationwide, we see a growing separation between ICE and local law enforcement. The belief that partnership between ICE and other law enforcement entities breeds distrust in immigrant communities is false. Prior to the rise of sanctuary policies, detainers were a useful tool. A detainer is placed on an alien who has been arrested by state or local law enforcement. Instead of releasing the alien back to the streets, the detainer requires law enforcement agencies to hold the alien so ICE may make an administrative arrest. Law enforcement used to honor detainers more widely until policies were implemented prohibiting the practice. In 2016, I was part of an operation designed to target alien heroin traffickers. When the mayor and city council members found out that ICE was working with Denver police on this operation, Denver police commanders were told to stop the operation and remove ICE from the building. Denver police shut down the operation after only 2 weeks, when operationally 54 illegal aliens were arrested for heroin-related crimes. Regardless of the results, Denver refused to work with ICE, claiming that it disrupted their ability to work with the immigrant community. This argument is invalid as it allows citizens to die from heroin overdoses rather than having local law enforcement and ICE work together to save lives. In 2020, an illegal alien who previously had DACA was arrested for murder for giving fentanyl and cocaine to a 16-year-old girl at a party. While the girl lay dying of an overdose, the alien was too busy raping a 14-year-old who was under the influence of drugs to call an ambulance. Upon arrest, ICE filed a detainer. Local law enforcement was prohibited from honoring it, and a drug dealer and sexual predator with admitted gang ties was allowed to walk out of the jail as locals choose to ignore ICE's request. ICE can only remain an effective enforcer of immigration laws through collaboration with local law enforcement. Such cooperation is proven to prevent illegal aliens convicted of criminal activity from victimizing our communities. Instead, sanctuary policies are utilized by the gangs and other criminal aliens who rely on this sanctuary to commit crimes in every U.S. community. In the fight against opioids, fentanyl, and increased gang activity, this cooperation is critical. In 2015, I included Denver Sheriff's Department gang intelligence deputies on a national task force operating against transnational gangs. Due to great teamwork, we identified numerous cases and arrested over a dozen gang members with criminal backgrounds. The state sanctuary policy ended that collaboration between ICE and the Denver Sheriff's Department. By refusing to cooperate with ICE, sanctuary cities are sending a message that they don't value the lives of citizens or the safety of our communities. Robust immigration enforcement strategies must be developed to protect our country from the risk of criminal illegal aliens. The first step must be returning to the rule of law and through the enforcement of immigration laws mandated by the INA. Criminal aliens should be detained and expeditiously removed from the country. ICE should be directed to address the millions of final removal orders that have been issued by immigration judges yet ignored for years. Congress must help ICE by invalidating departmental policies that handcuff the agency and prioritize slim and ambiguous categories of cases. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you for your testimony. Our next witness is Mr. Batista.
Before I begin, Mr. Rosenberg, we just met, and I just want to express my sincere thoughts, and my heart goes out to you for the loss of your son, deeply. Chair McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Ramon Batista, and I'm the Chief of Police for the city of Santa Monica, California. I was born in Los Angeles and raised in Tucson, Arizona, where I spent the bulk of my policing career in a city about 60 miles from the U.S.-Mexico border. My approach to law enforcement is evidence-based and community-oriented, with the goal of improving public safety for all. As a member of the Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force, I also benefit from the collective knowledge of a nonpartisan network of thought leaders who are attentive to the unique challenges and opportunities that arise while serving immigrant communities. First, I want to affirm the generally positive effect of immigration on the United States. Most of the immigrants I have encountered firsthand are hard workers who are eager to build a better life here, provide for their families, and pursue the American dream. They fill critical labor shortages in key industries that Americans rely on, and as our friends, fellow parishioners, neighbors, and loved ones, they often influence our lives for the better. That said, I also understand that immigrants are people, and all people are capable of doing bad things. However, I disagree with the premise that immigrants are more prone to criminality than native-born Americans. My experience and the existing evidence overwhelmingly suggests that immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, pose no greater threat to public safety than anyone else. And in fact, their presence may help reduce crime in certain areas. As a law enforcement officer, my job is to stop perpetrators of crime, no matter their immigration status. But ultimately, I work in policing because of all the law-abiding residents whom I feel lucky to call part of my community. Undocumented immigrants who live and work with dignity in Santa Monica are a part of my community, and I take seriously my duty to keep them safe, just as I do for any U.S. citizen. During my career that has spanned 37 years and 2 border states, one of the most critical lessons I have learned is the importance of trust. Trust is the lifeblood of community-oriented policing, and it is especially essential among marginalized groups who might otherwise be afraid to come forward. There are a myriad of reasons why immigrants in particular may hesitate to cooperate with police, but perhaps the greatest fear they face is that of going to law enforcement for help. They could inadvertently expose themselves or their loved ones to immigration consequences. When law enforcement is able to overcome these concerns through trust building, it can save lives. Before I moved to Santa Monica, I served as a police chief in Arizona, where I knew I needed to prioritize connecting with the local immigrant community so they felt safe and comfortable. That concerted effort paid off when a father came to us worried. His teenage son, who was experiencing mental illness, had started making alarming comments and had bought an assault weapon, raising fears that he might soon resort to violence. The father was undocumented and felt nervous to come forward, but his love for his son and his community prevailed, and the outreach we had done throughout the city fostered a mutual understanding that we would not only treat him fairly, but also take care of his child. This, to me, is the purpose of state and local law enforcement, to neutralize real threats to public safety in our communities and to empower civilians under our jurisdiction in their pursuit of justice. Meanwhile, the enforcement of immigration laws has always primarily been a federal responsibility. Local police departments like mine should use our limited resources to catch people who are actively doing harm, instead of helping to remove residents with no criminal background beyond minor immigration violations. On that note, it is no secret that our federal immigration system is broken, and that immigrants who hope to come to the U.S. for safety and opportunity often find few, if any, lines to legally do so. Immigrants who commit crimes of violence or otherwise imperil public safety should face consequences. But for the vast majority who are law-abiding and want to contribute positively to our communities, we should expand opportunities to live and work legally in the U.S. Many of these individuals are people of faith who care deeply about their families and embody core American values. When we embrace them, they're not only willing, but they're eager to stand for the guiding principles of our nation. They stand firm in their belief of democracy, liberty, and freedom. And for this reason, I am honored and humbled to sit here today so that I can testify to the urgency for Republicans and Democrats to work together and fix our immigration laws. As much pride as I take in the hard-won victories like the one in Arizona, I wrestle with the knowledge that other tragedies across the country could be prevented were people not afraid to come forward with vital information. Immigration reform that would provide security for law-abiding U.S. residents would not only help them and their families, it would also help me and other law enforcement professionals do our jobs. I welcome this dialogue and hope to be a resource for your subcommittee as you work toward fixing our immigration system. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And finally, we'll hear from Mr. Rosenberg.
Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, Ranking Member Nadler, and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify before the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration Integrity, Security, and Enforcement. If only we had immigration integrity, security, and enforcement, I wouldn't be here today, and my son and tens of thousands of others would be alive. I am the president of Advocates for Victims of Illegal Alien Crime. Let me be clear, we are not against immigration, asylum, or refugee programs. We are against criminality. My son Drew, on his way home from law school, was killed by a criminal illegal alien over 12 years ago. The illegal alien who ran him over drove back and forth over his body 3 times, attempting to flee. On the 3rd time, he stopped when a man stood in front of his car. His rear tire was resting on my son's abdomen, and 5 men had to lift the car off his lifeless body. Surely that is a consequence of illegal immigration. The AVIAC board members have all lost a loved one to illegal alien crime. Maureen Maloney's 23-year-old son was killed by a drunk driver in 2011. The illegal alien ran a stop sign, collided with Matthew, and dragged his body a 1/4 mile. The killer was released from prison 2 months ago. Brian McCann's brother, Denny, was a hit-and-run victim in 2011. The killer was caught, but Cook County, Illinois Board crafted a sanctuary policy that allowed the killer to post bond. He was released and fled to Mexico. After 12 years, he was finally extradited and will stand trial. Maureen LeCare's brother, Richard, was killed in 2009 when a woman who overstayed her visa ran a red light and T-boned his car. She was charged with vehicular homicide but never went to trial. Almost a year after Richard's death, she was allowed to return to Portugal without spending a day in jail. All of these deaths were preventable. There are no annual statistics on criminal alien crime. There is a report compiled by the GAO using data from the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program, SCAP, that studied the crimes committed by criminal aliens in federal and state prisons between 2011 and 2016. Those inmates were responsible for over 33,000 murders, homicides, and manslaughters. How many other preventable deaths by criminal aliens before 2011 and after 2016? 10,000, 20,000 or more? We don't know. But even those numbers are a small portion of all the crimes committed by illegal aliens. As the report mentions 3 different times, these are minimum numbers, as not all jurisdictions participate in SCAP. The numbers are also understated because there are minimum requirements to be counted. During 2011 to 2016, those same inmates were responsible for over 2 million other crimes. What will these numbers look like going forward? So far, over 2 million more asylum seekers have been released into the country in just the first 2 years of the Biden administration. These 2 million have received little to no vetting, only checking if they had been in the country and been prior deported. Less than 15% will be granted asylum. The rest will be ordered deported, but less than 5% will ever leave. What is now probably 2 million gotaways that have not been vetted at all are roaming the country freely and more likely to have criminal intent. None of them will be deported until they have committed some heinous crime, if even then. Furthermore, sanctuary policy thwarts ICE from deporting convicted criminal aliens. This past May, San Mateo County in California passed an ordinance that no county employees can cooperate with the federal government, even if the crimes committed were child molestation, rape, or murder. These people are not a threat to public safety? I have watched these hearings for a decade as victims pour their heart out, obviously to no avail. Some of you will tell me you are sorry for my loss. How many of you will be sincere? We don't need sympathy. Nothing you do will bring back our loved ones. I've had enough sympathy to last me for the rest of my life. What we need is some sanity. DHS's first priority must be removing all criminal aliens, not some, but all. At the same time, the border must be secured. Only those people we fully vet should be allowed in. For the past 12 years, I have worked daily to reduce and eliminate the consequences of criminal aliens on U.S. communities. I wish I felt our government was doing the same thing. I hope I don't get a call one day that your loved one is the latest victim. Thank you. I look forward to answering your questions. I'm available to meet with you at any time.
Great. I want to thank all of you for your testimony, and we'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule of questions, and we'll begin with Mr. Biggs.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Schoenleben, it seems to me that one of the core American values is the rule of law. Would you agree with that? How about you, Mr. Fabricatore?
Yes, absolutely, sir.
Mr. Bautista, that rule of law, core, right?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Rosenberg, you'd agree with that as well.
As we hear, no one is above the law.
Mr. Fabricatore, am I saying that right, Fabricatore?
Fabricatore, yes, sir.
Fabricatore. Here's my question for you, and that is, how many people who enter between the ports of entry without legal documents have violated U.S. law?
They violate the law the minute that they enter the country by crossing around the ports of entry.
Everyone?
Yes.
Everyone?
Every single one.
Every one of those 2 million gotaways that Mr. Rosenberg told us about. Is that consistent with the rule of law?
No, sir, it is not.
So here's another question, and Mr. Rosenberg touched on it, and you touched on it a little bit, so it's really critical here. People who are in this country illegally, who commit an additional crime against a citizen or someone who is here legally, if they were not in this country illegally, would they have been able to commit that crime?
No, they would not have been.
So a crime prevention strategy would be to enforce the law and secure the border, would it not?
Yes, sir, it would be.
Do you know whether Secretary Mayorkas has told members of ICE and limited their authority on executing removal orders on the more than 1.4 million people who already have a removal order in this country?
Yes, through his priorities, he has limited that.
Tell me how so.
Well, the priorities state that we're not to go after just final orders that don't have recent criminal backgrounds or criminal backgrounds at all. So you're just allowing that to keep growing and growing.
So we passed H.R. 2 out of this body. It languishes in the Senate. Doesn't fix every problem with border security, but it makes a start. We have a Secretary of Homeland Security that has told ICE to stand down. We have a Secretary of Homeland Security who is engaged in a catch and release program. You know what he has said is his priorities? Any one of you know what he has said one of his priorities is? He has said it's to make illegal immigration more humane, to expedite those who enter our country illegally. Does that sound like the rule of law to you, Mr. Rosenberg?
Not at all.
How about you, Mr. Batista? Does that sound like the rule of law?
Not in following the letter of the law, no.
Mr. Schoenleben?
No, sir.
Mr. Fabricatore?
Absolutely not, sir.
So we're left when the chief law enforcement officer, the head of the DHS in this country, says, stand down, don't enforce the law. I have trouble accepting the notion that those who come into this country illegally, they enter this country illegally, regardless of motivation, understand and accept our adherence to the rule of law. And I'll tell you what, If you have people who don't understand the rule of law and its importance, you cannot have freedom, because it facilitates what every one of you know. The bully bad guys will be able to go free, they'll be undeterred, and they will go after and cause havoc and mayhem. I'm not saying everybody who comes to this country illegally is going to commit an additional crime, but they are born under a crime entering this country illegally. And I want to mention real quick, Marianne Mendoza, whose son Brandon Mendoza, police officer, killed by, and I know Mr. Batista knows the Phoenix area, on a valley freeway. This individual illegally into the country, drunk, driving for literally miles and miles, runs into Mr. Mendoza, or Mr. Runnebeck, Steve Runnebeck's son Grant, who was killed by an illegal alien who put a gun to his head because he didn't provide him change fast enough at the convenience store. No, they don't share our core values.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by getting some of the facts out there. There is no data to suggest that localities with community trust policies have more criminal activities than others. In fact, hundreds of local law enforcement agencies throughout the United States have adopted community trust policies. And across the country, these local police departments, the ones that my Republican colleagues are so quick to claim that they support, report that trust policies actually reduce crime. Recent comprehensive studies have supported those claims statistically, showing that community trust jurisdictions are demonstrably safer than their counterparts. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit a sampling of those different studies for the record.
Without objection.
We know that victims and witnesses are much more likely to report crime and cooperate with investigations and prosecutions when they believe that there is little or no risk of deportation if they reach out. Moreover, we know that abusers will use an individual's immigrant status to intimidate them into staying silent. Local law enforcement relies heavily on these victims and witnesses to prevent and punish criminal activity. So Chief Batista, let me turn to you. I don't want my colleagues to take my word for it. Can you help us understand why jurisdictions with community trust policies in place experience less crime and why their residents feel safer?
Yes, ma'am. Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, what I've seen in my history is that time and again in our communities, when we embrace immigrants and make them feel and be a part of our normal life, that they behave in those same manners, in that they cooperate with law enforcement, and that they no longer are victims that live in the shadows. One of the greatest concerns I have in that situation is that a victim that does not come forward just makes a perfect victim. And I don't think anyone in this room, and certainly no one in law enforcement, ever supports that occurring to anyone in our country.
One of the studies that I submitted into the record found that jurisdictions that adopted sanctuary policies experienced a 52 to 62% reduction in the domestic homicide rate for Hispanic women. Chief Batista, does that statistic track with your experience as a law enforcement officer in jurisdictions that have those kinds of policies?
Yes, it does.
Domestic violence accounts for approximately 15% of all violent crimes, but it often goes unreported. How do community trust policies help domestic violence victims feel more comfortable coming forward?
In the same way, ma'am, in that when we respond on a call for assistance from a victim of domestic violence, we want them to know that their status in the United States is not our primary concern. Our concern at that point is their safety and their welfare. And that has been our guiding principle since I was in Arizona and certainly in California, and I've seen that it works.
I really appreciate that. Chief Batista, you've worked in law enforcement for nearly 4 decades, both in Arizona, most recently in California. Have you seen a difference in how welcoming those states are towards immigrants?
Yes.
And can you compare your engagement with communities of color in Santa Monica and in Mesa?
I'll tell you that as a whole in Arizona, it was much more challenging in that the state's immigration laws made it difficult for local law enforcement to build a relationship in those circumstances. And I'd attended many meetings with immigrant communities, and it felt as though in those meetings, folks were just trying to get by, trying to survive. The difference that I've experienced in Santa Monica, in Los Angeles, is that there, immigrant communities are forthright and willing to come out and engage and be a part of the social fabric of neighborhoods. And their kids and the encouragement that they receive is not just to be able to get through high school, but to be thinking about what college, what university they're going to go to, and what profession are they going to pursue. And it just feels as though folks are more welcoming and understanding and wanting to achieve the American dream just like everyone else.
Just like everyone else. Can you discuss how passing immigration reform, which brings undocumented individuals out of the shadows and regularizes their immigration status, would actually improve the job you're trying to do around local policing and national security?
Community policing is foundational precept, is trust. I mentioned it earlier. And so having them come out of the shadows, like I said, normalizes their behaviors in our neighborhoods, in our cities, and makes it so that that communication, that ability to understand what's going on at the neighborhood level is improved. And I can't say enough about how it will improve our ability to mitigate threats at even the national level.
Thank you, Chief Batista, for getting those facts out there. I think it's clear our words matter, and it's important that we discuss these issues carefully. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tiffany.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, words do matter, and Mr. Orwell would be highly interested in the discussion that's being had here. Community trust equals a sanctuary city. They've renamed sanctuary cities now right here in the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives. And saying that there's less crime in a community that is a sanctuary city, which as sanctuary city almost certainly has a Soros prosecutor. And you're going to tell us that there is not as much crime? Those prosecutors in the big cities are not prosecuting crime in many instances, and we saw it firsthand up in New York City. Mr. Rosenberg, is crime up in California over the last couple decades?
Yes,
Mr.
tremendously up.
Mr. Batista.
Chairman McClintock, Mr. Tiffany, I didn't catch the question.
Is crime up in California over the last couple decades?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. I can tell you that in our jurisdiction locally, we're about 7% higher than we were last year.
Mr. F.
Yes, sir. It's up in Colorado.
Mr. Shane Laban?
It's up in Orange County, California, for sure.
Significantly?
Yeah, in fact, yes, sir. I can actually tell you, just as a quick example for residential burglaries, in 2022, our office filed 542 residential burglaries for the entire year. This year to date, we're already at 414. We're projected 828 for 2023. So, yes.
In California, is crime down in the sanctuary cities?
I'm sorry?
Is crime down in the sanctuary cities in California?
Not to my knowledge, no, sir.
Mr. F., is the Biden administration following the law? Is the Biden administration following federal law?
They're not following the Immigration Nationality Act, no.
Have you read or become familiar with the Secure the Border bill that we just passed?
I've read some of it, sir.
Is it an improvement on what we have now?
It would be an improvement. It would be actually enforcing the law.
Would you recommend to all congressional representatives before you today to vote for that Secure the Border bill?
Yes, sir.
We hear about fentanyl bills that are kind of chipping away at the edges, Mr. F. I keep saying the number one thing we can do to reduce fentanyl, and by far number one, number two is way down the line, is to secure the border. Is that accurate?
Yes. It's very accurate. Securing the border would actually help keep the fentanyl out. That's the cartels that are moving the fentanyl.
In fact, it's rather interesting. When we made the trip down to, it was a couple years ago that my colleague, Mr. Biggs, took us down to the county just south, Cochise County. Cochise County, and the sheriff said things were getting under control down there as the wall was being built, and they were able to put crime control measures in place, and they were telling a very positive story. We just had him before us a couple months ago, and he said things are out of control, and that fentanyl, there's a reason why it's gone up by 80% or whatever the number is, that's coming into America, and it's primarily because the border is open. Do you believe that to be true?
I do believe it to be true. As the border gets open and more people are just rushing in, the Border Patrol is being kept from actually being on the line on the border. So it's harder for them to stop any fentanyl that may be coming in.
Mr. Shane Laban, when I was down in Panama about 2 years ago, I heard that many Haitians that were coming through had actually resettled in places like Brazil and Chile. Have you seen any Haitians that came via this, the ESTA visa program that you referred to in Chile?
So we don't break down the actual national birthplace of each defendant. What we've been looking at is trying to figure out who our criminals are and where they're coming from and how they're getting in. And when we've done that, we found that wherever their birthplace, whether it be from Argentina, Puerto Rico, and so on, they've been utilizing the Chilean ESTA program to get into the country and then commit crime.
Have you or anyone in your office asked Secretary Mayorkas to change this program to protect Americans?
We have not spoken directly with Secretary Mayorkas. We have worked with Department of Homeland Security. We've worked with the FBI. In every briefing that we've done, we've been a part of no less than a half a dozen briefings between those two agencies. The Homeland Security has been aware of this issue for at least 4 years. Same with the FBI. So then we've started reaching out. We were told it would take an act of Congress to fix this. So here we are.
So they haven't done anything?
Not to my knowledge. I do know that there's been a meeting or there's a meeting planned. The concern from our office is there's routine questions or routine promises that things will happen. Our concern is we'd like them to actually happen.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Batista, as I mentioned in my opening statement, next month is the anniversary of the El Paso shooting. In that tragic incident, a domestic terrorist murdered 23 people. He posted a racist manifesto espousing white nationalist theories and claiming that there was a Hispanic invasion, even telling investigators later that he was targeting Mexicans. Can you discuss the impact that this type of rhetoric has on minority communities?
Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Nadler, yes, it has a devastating effect on migrant and minority communities in that it forces them to go underground and communicate and cooperate much less. It forces them into the shadows. It doesn't help the work of public safety if large segments of our community are cast away in that manner.
How does it impact you as a Hispanic man yourself?
You know, as a police chief of nearly 40 years, and certainly when I'm wearing the uniform or this, there is a level of respect that I see, I feel, but certainly when I take all of this off, I experience the same challenges that other ethnic minorities in this country experience. And it informs me, it informs my leadership and my views on how things have to improve.
Thank you. The Major Cities Chiefs Association, a professional organization of police executives representing the largest cities in the United States and Canada, has previously stated that if law enforcement officers are viewed by members of the immigrant community as colluding with or working with immigration law enforcement officers, this would, quote, result in increased crime against immigrants in the broader community, create a class of silent victims, and eliminate the potential for assistance from immigrants in solving crimes or preventing future terroristic acts. Do you agree with this statement?
Yes, sir.
Do you think if minority communities and specifically immigrant communities feel unsafe, that it makes everyone in that jurisdiction less safe?
Yes, sir.
And if so, can you explain why?
The level of cooperation that we need in order to be successful encompasses the same things that we expect and the way that we do and the way that we're successful in communities across the country. But if we have ethnic minority communities, immigrant communities, where we can't penetrate, where we can't get information, that affects our national security through and through. It is not just people coming from across the border. It is in any immigrant community in this country where we need to understand and better understand what it is that is occurring. And without that information, we are at a deficit, and it makes our country less safe.
Thank you. In your opening statement, you told a compelling story about how an undocumented individual was willing to come forward and express concerns about his own son to law enforcement because of the outreach you did and the trust you built. Is that kind of story indicative of the positive results you have seen from implementing community trust policies?
Chairman Nadler, Ranking Member Nadler, that is but one of the many examples and wins that I remember from my time in Arizona. I spent the bulk of my time as an officer in the Tucson Police Department, and there we worked very hard to work on the relationship with our immigrant communities. That story that I told stays with me simply because of the significance of how difficult it must have been for that man to come forward. But yes, at the end, those stories ring true for me.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Roy.
I thank the chairman. I thank all the witnesses for being here. Mr. Rosenberg, you explained the tragic loss of your son. If I remember correctly, there were obstacles to the removal of the criminal alien who unfortunately killed your son, and was not the current secretary at that point, Secretary Mayorkas, at that point in the Obama administration, and can you characterize his help or lack of help in ensuring the both prosecution and or deportation of the individual in question?
Well, I didn't know of his involvement at the time, but after the trial and Roberto Gallo was sentenced to 6 months in jail, I met with my congressman, Henry Waxman at the time, and said, I want to make sure this guy is detained and deported. He had somebody write a letter to USCIS, of which Mayorkas was the head of at the time, and he got back a letter that said that Gallo would not be detained or deported because, and this is an exact quote, he's only committed one crime of moral turpitude. And as I learned later on, that was, and as we see today, that's Mayorkas's policy. Killing somebody doesn't necessarily reach the level to be deported.
So the current Secretary of Homeland Security felt that it was not something that merited deportation because he had, quote, only had one crime of moral turpitude.
Yes.
One crime.
Yes.
Does that one crime mean a lot to your family, sir?
Means everything to my family.
Do you think such a statement and a position is befitting of someone who swears an oath to uphold the laws of the United States, whether it was in a position in USCIS under President Obama or now as secretary of a department charged with securing the homeland of the United States?
Well, myself and our group was against his even being appointed. I did get to meet him in 2014. At the time, I still didn't know that he was, part of what happened, in my son's case. And he lied to me constantly. I mean, the one thing you learn when you're in publishing is ask somebody questions that you know the answer to, and if they lie, you'll know they're lying.
So I'm interested in that perspective because the Secretary of Homeland Security lied to me in this very room when he said under oath that, quote, we have operational control of the border. He then went on to testify in the United States Senate that, quote, well, we can't have operational control of the border under that definition in the Secure Fence Act. And at the same time, Raul Ortiz testified that, in fact, we do not have operational control of the border. Do you think it is a problem for the Secretary of Homeland Security to come into this room, into the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee, and lie about maintaining operational control of the border?
Not only do I think it's a problem, I certainly think, it's that he should no longer be in office.
I think countless Americans share that view, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate your testimony. Mr. Fabricatori, we first got to know each other when I was in Denver, Colorado, around the time that the ICE facility was being unfortunately ransacked and a flag being turned upside, the American flag being turned upside down. I appreciate your service in ICE. Do these numbers sound correct to you, that between FY18 and FY22, that for ICE, there's been a 69% decline in overall civil ICE arrests, 65% decline in convicted criminals, 26% homicide related, 53% reduction in weapons offenses, 33% reduction in sexual offense and sexual assault, 58% reduction in assault, 50% robbery, 40% kidnapping, 61% family offense. Is ICE able to do its job under the Biden administration today?
No, they're not able to do their job, and the statistics bear that out.
Can you explain to the United States, the people of the United States, why?
It's the priorities that this administration has put forth. It's limiting what ICE officers can do. It's limiting the Border Patrol agents. You know, right now we have so many people entering that they're just showing up at the ICE offices, and ICE officers are just basically processing. They're not out on the street making arrests. So these arrest numbers are going to be down. And under these priorities, it's only going to get worse.
And the consequence is dead Americans, the consequence is dead migrants, the consequence is tons of fentanyl pouring into the United States. And it's a direct consequence of the policies chosen to be enacted by the President of the United States and his Secretary of Homeland Security. Do you agree, sir?
I agree, sir.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to welcome the witnesses. And Mr. Rosenberg, please accept my condolences for your loss. I'm also a father, and no father should ever have to attend their child's funeral. Every day I pray that my children come home safely. Every day. Please, I pray for you and your family. When it comes to crime, victims of crimes, criminals, in my opinion, with or without documents, there is no room for you in our society, period. Wanted to, if I can, turn to the issue of trust that we've kind of touched on or not. Mr. Schollenben, you are from Orange County. Mr. Spitzer, your boss, Sheriff Barnes, his predecessor, we all have worked in our communities to earn the trust of our communities. We have a high percentage of workers who are undocumented that are actually employed in the Disney area, the hotel industry. Trust is very important when it comes to crime fighting. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I came home from work. Helicopters, police cars everywhere. Drive up to my driveway, my wife says, what is going on in the neighborhood? So I said, honey, let me make some phone calls. Local police chief tells me a rapist has been caught in the act. Tell my wife, it's okay, I think they're about to catch him. She freaked out. Locked the doors, locked the windows. There's a rapist in our community. She was right. Later on, we found out what had happened. A young man got caught raping a woman in the local laundry room. The apartment's right across the street from my house. Found out later on that he had raped no less than 20 undocumented women. Minimum of 20 because we don't know how many others never reported the crime. This guy is gone forever, but if these women had not stepped up and reported the crime, he would have never been arrested. If he would not been caught in the act, he would have kept going. This is why trust in our communities is so important when it comes to reporting crimes. All of us are part of the same community. You want to talk? I'm glad you're here to talk about the Chilean issue. As you know, your boss called me late last year to address this very specific issue. I have been working with your office, the Chilean embassy, with the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the State Department to figure out what is going on with this visa program. And by the way, I believe Chile is the only country in Latin America that has this program in place. No other country. Now, if I can, Mr. Chairman, without objection, I'd like to submit for the record some of the correspondence, some of the letters we've been writing back and forth, and I believe some as well to Mr. Spitzer. One dated June 15th from Congress members Kim living in Korea to Mr. Mayorkas on this specific issue. June 15th from Levin Correa on Chile, again, to the ambassador of Chile. June 6th from Korea to DHS and the State Department on this issue, from the Ambassador of Chile to Mr. Todd Spitzer, dated June 14th, to the Embassy of Chile to yours truly, dated June 16th. So these, I think,
Without objection.
if you could please submit those. These are some of the issues that we've been dealing with. And I thank you for being here. And I thank Mr. Spitzer for bringing this up, because the first step in solving a case is to know that the crime is actually happening. The issues here, and I only have 44 seconds, is, as you kind of alluded, are the databases, the criminal databases that are not quite connected over there, and we're in the middle of working with that. And the bottom line, all the gobbledygook put aside, is this thing either gets fixed or that visa program is revoked, as it should be. Because any criminal, whether it's in Orange County, Mr. Spitzer's backyard, or my backyard, is a crime that's unacceptable. And by the way, it's not just Chileans. There's a number of European gangs that are also involved in these kinds of programs that we need to shut down immediately. So I want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony. We want to make sure we continue to work with your office and others to make sure our communities, our citizens are safe. Thank you very much, and Mr. Chair, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rosenberg, I'm not going to offer you condolences because you need a lot more than that. You've heard thousands and thousands of people are saying how sad and how sorry they are. The only time you're going to feel good in your heart is when we have the right laws and we have a safe country. So I will say this to you. I promise, and I think there's many people on this committee, that we will work our hardest and do our best to achieve that goal.
Thank you. That's all I could ask for.
Mr. Batista, you know, I have prepared remarks, and hopefully I'll get to some of them, I don't know, but you really fascinate me, for real. I mean, you have been in law enforcement most of your adult life, correct?
Chairman McClintock, Mr. Van Drew, yes, sir.
Okay. And you expressed today basically that communities are safer and better with undocumented, with illegal residents coming in, and that literally it can be very good for the community, correct?
Yes, sir. When undocumented folks come out of the shadows and they're normalized as normal neighborhoods across the country, we are safer.
And so the communities are better for that?
Our communities are better for that,
Okay.
yes.
So there are actually almost a significant number of the countries in our world have many people who are suffering under dictatorships, under poverty, under all kinds of issues around the world. If it's so good for us, and that's a sincere question, why don't we just open the country up completely? Why don't we open up the northern border more? Why don't we bring people from the Eastern Bloc? Why don't we bring illegally? I mean, we don't even call it illegal anymore. Why don't we just say, and if you think this is good, tell me, why don't we just say our country is open to anybody who shows up and wants to come in? Not legally, but no more. There is no more legal process. Because, by the way, people who immigrate illegally the right way, I feel so bad for them because the system doesn't work well enough. Good people who've worked hard and they're waiting year after year to get into the United States of America and do it the right way, and they refuse to do it the wrong way. But Mr. Batista, are they kind of foolish to do that? To wait those years and go through the process?
Mr. Van Drew, my role and my life's work has been about protecting those folks that can't protect themselves. I take great pride in the work that our profession does.
Respectfully, Mr. Batista, I would like you to answer my question.
So I would say that the role of determining
I'm asking you as a person, as a human being sitting next to Mr. Rosenberg, is it good, or is it a waste of time when all these people who wait for years, good, hardworking people that want the dream of the shining city on the hill, America, is it good, or are they wasting their time, and should they just come in illegally?
Mr. Van Drew, I think that the work
Please answer my question specifically.
The work of determining how that's going to work is really on the shoulders of Republicans and Democrats.
So you're not going to answer
role
my
is
question. I'm asking you as a person, you vote, you care. I'm asking you what you think. How do you feel for those people that wait for all those years and could have done it a whole different way, but believe in the rule of law? It's kind of hard on them, don't you think? Those folks don't like what's happening in our country right now. Talk to good people who came here legally, and they waited, and they worked, and then they pledged their allegiance to the flag and to the United States of America. So I would ask you, if it's a good thing, and this is a question I want to know, and if you answer no, it wouldn't be a good thing, I want to know why not. If this has been a good thing, why don't we open, Asian people are good people, are they not? Black people are good people from Africa. People from the Eastern Bloc countries, many of them suffer a great deal. People from Russia that could get over from all over the world, there are people that want to come to America. So why don't we just open it up? Because it makes us better, according to you.
Mr. Andrew, it's been my life's work to
Please answer
adhere
that question.
to the rule of law. And so I would say that the determination of improving our country's immigration laws really rests with Republicans and Democrats.
I know where it rests. I understand the process. I'm asking you what you feel as a human being, as a law enforcement officer who has been involved for the most of your adult life. You told us this is a good thing, people should come out, and it improves communities. And I want to have an answer from you as a human being. Is that good for America? Has this helped America?
Again, I'll say that I believe in the rule of law, and our job
You're
is
saying
to
nothing,
fix
Mr.
our
Batista. I'm sorry.
nation's immigration
I respect
laws.
you in law enforcement, but I don't respect what you're saying. I yield back.
Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our witnesses, thank you all for being here. And Mr. Rosenberg, I want to add my own condolences to you. I'm a mother of two, and I can't imagine anything happening to either of my children. So I stand with my colleagues who've provided their condolences to you. You know, I do want to say for people watching this hearing, this is my 5th year in Congress, and I've seen a really alarming trend that's become increasingly more alarming every year that I've been in Congress. And that trend is the desire and effort to paint immigrants as criminals. And the reason for that is to essentially dehumanize immigrants. And that allows for a furthering of xenophobic rhetoric and xenophobic policies and anti-immigrant policies as well. And there is a serious consequence to engaging that way. There is a serious consequence to painting immigrants as dangerous or threatening and making the country feel fearful of them. And that is that there is a promotion of hate of immigrants. I represent El Paso, Texas. And last week, a killer who drove 10 hours from East Texas to El Paso, which is a border community that has a quarter of our population that is immigrant born and is also one of the safest communities in the United States of America. An individual, a domestic terrorist, a white nationalist, drove over 10 hours to my community, and he confessed that he did that in order to slaughter Mexicans and immigrants because of the invasion. And that is a word that is frequently used by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and by politicians all across this country who want to promote that xenophobia. He came to my community, walked into a busy Walmart where there were families shopping for school supplies, where there were kids raising money for their sports teams, where there were senior citizens waiting to buy their prescription medication. And he walked in with an assault-style weapon, and he slaughtered 23 people. He left dozens injured. And years later, we're about to next month will be another terrible anniversary. My community still lives with deep trauma and profound pain. He was not an undocumented immigrant, he was a US citizen. And U.S. citizens are carrying out massacres all across the country with automatic-style weapons, and I don't see the same urgency to have that conversation from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And I will say, representing the border and living on the border and being a third-generation border resident, having raised both my children, both of whom are fourth-generation border residents on the border, there's nobody who wants a well-managed, safe border more than those of us who live there. But the only way to do it is if Republicans work with Democrats in a bipartisan manner to update laws that haven't been updated in almost 40 years. And Mr. Bautista, one of my colleagues decided to try to badger you into trying to get you to acknowledge I don't know what. And unfortunately, this is the same deflection I see over and over again from colleagues who love to point the finger at other people about immigration laws, but colleagues who refuse to look in the mirror to say, it's my job and my obligation to update outdated immigration laws. So I will tell all of you here, it is our job to address this situation, and a key way to address this and to create safer communities is by opening up legal pathways. But unfortunately, we are not going to see that from our colleagues by and large on the other side of the aisle, and instead we're going to see the same thing, which is a shrinking of legal pathways, a refusal to modernize outdated laws, and that is precisely what creates a deeply broken system. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Bartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually disagree with the concept that, unless laws changes, we're not going to be enforcing them. The law is the law. We have to have the rule of law. We have laws in the books. They might need to change. If they change, they change. But to refuse and to enforce the laws that exist on the books, I think it's dereliction of duty. And I truly believe it puts a significant national security risk. And I've been at the border many times since I became Congresswoman, and I'm shocked. And I think it's not just national security risk, it's actually huge security risk for a lot of desperate people that come here and become pretty much puppets and control and slaves to cartels that make enormous amount of money. So this is very concerning, and as a legal immigrant to this country, I understand how hard it is in many other people to try to immigrate here, but we have the law and we have the rule of law. If we have to look at the laws, but no excuse not enforcing the law, because a lot of lives are going to be destroyed because of that. But Mr. Fabricatore, and I apologize if I say your name wrong, would you be surprised to know that 10 months into fiscal year 2023, ICE Denver has only removed 429 aliens with final orders of removal pursuant to INA Section 240, and has only removed 256 aliens whose final orders were reinstated. Do these low interior removal numbers surprise you?
Yes, ma'am, those are low.
Do they surprise you as it was something different when you actually were in office?
No, it doesn't surprise me because of the enforcement priorities right now. So I'm not surprised that those numbers would be low.
So do you believe, because when I observed when I was at the border, I was very surprised to see how the selective enforcement and laws, when you go in processing centers, there was during COVID pandemic, there are people on top of each other, and no one enforced any. Then you go to ICE facility, there have to be isolations, and everyone has to be there on a distance, which actually decrease capacity, and a lot of border patrol just have to pretty much let people go, and sometimes with NTA, sometimes with that. Then in shelters, where they need to move along kids and stop even doing proper checking who they send in kids, because they also were overwhelmed there. So it's very strange to me, because it seems like that is the places where we should have really start looking what's going on and put danger of these people. Do you believe this law actually put real people, real lives in danger, including people at the border?
Absolutely, it puts lives at danger.
And I think, with Mr. Rosenberg, you see what the effects could do in the community. But I have quickly to ask, Mr. Bautista, do you believe in the rule of law?
Chairman McClintock, Ms. Spartz, do I believe in the rule of law? Yes.
So do you believe we have the rule of law at our southern border? is functioning effectively. The rule of law and the legal system is actually functioning in our border. Do you believe is effective what's happening in our border?
Ms. Spartz, I support the strengthening
No, I'm just asking, do you believe, on your assessment, you're professional, you're district attorney, what do you believe? Do we have the functioning and the rule of law at the border?
Ms. Spartz, could you repeat the question
So
specifically?
at our current situation in the border, do you think we have the rule of law at our southern border?
What we need to make sure is that the border is secure, ma'am.
But I'm just saying, do we have it or not in your assessment as a professional?
That is the part that I leave to federal immigration authorities, ma'am.
So you cannot assess the situation on the border. Okay, what about you, Mr. Let me sure that I say your name right, Mr. Schollenberg?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you believe we have the rule of law functioning at the border?
Ma'am, I wouldn't begin to testify about what's going on at the border. What I can tell you is, and what I'm here to say for our office, is there are current loopholes through the ESTA visa program as well as with the border through through individuals claiming status at the border. So those flaws at the border and through the ESTA program are creating criminals. One of those issues with the ESTA program can be fixed tonight, and there will be less victims tomorrow.
So you believe there are problems at the border? I mean, you live in the state of California. No matter which district you represent, this is the state. You should know what's happening in your border.
Yes, if your question is, do I think there are problems at the border? Yes. And
yeah, but what about Mr. Batista? You believe you don't have problems at the border? Are you not familiar what's happening in your border? I mean, this is California has a border.
Ma'am, again, my responsibility is with the city of Santa Monica.
So you don't go to the border at all. You don't even know what's happening.
Our partners with federal immigration and protection of the border, I certainly support that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, it's unfortunate because I think we need to find common ground, but I think we need to enforce the law because a lot of lives are going to be destroyed. Yield back.
Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record fiscal year 2023 removal numbers from ICE enforcement and removal operations.
Without objection.
And Mr. Chairman, I also have a unanimous consent request to enter into the record statements from the following organizations that have concerns about the conflation of crime and immigration: Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence, Assista Immigration Assistance, Church World Service, Detention Watch Network, Esperanza United, National Network to End Domestic Violence, Tahiri Justice Center, and Valor US.
Without objection. Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Whether I agree with all of you or none of you, let me express my appreciation for your presence here today. With a little level of seniority, I have been through this for 28 years on this committee and actually worked on any number of comprehensive immigration reform initiatives that just couldn't find common ground. We're now at a point where common ground couldn't be found with a microscope. It was far closer to common ground on this issue in 2008, 2010, with Senator McClain and the Gang of Eight. I wish America had taken up that opportunity. Because if we look at our history, this is a land of immigrants and a land of laws. All of us came here. Mine was dastardly. Others struggle and die coming. And others migrated, immigrated, fleeing famine and persecution. And so we all have come here strangers other than our friends who are Native Americans. It gives me pause when people want to demonize immigrants, migrants, and they want the same opportunities all of us do. Unlike my friend, Mr. Rosenberg, I am going to offer sympathy and sorry that the laws did not, I believe, fittingly respond to your pain and to your loss. We need to realize that any form of crime is addressed appropriately for the level of crime that it is. But I do want to say that witnesses who offer themselves before us do not need to be battered, do not need to be challenged for the distinctiveness of their views. They need to be probed. So let me first of all quickly say that statistics have shown that the end of Title 42 or the thought was by Republicans, that it resulted in a flood of migrants. But border numbers have fallen over 70% of migrants in the past few months. It also finds that trust cities, that both property and violent crime decreased more in those counties than in non-trust counties after 2014. In fact, they found that on average there are 35.5 fewer crimes per 10,000 people in these, in quotes, trust counties. Reinforcing this, the effect is even more pronounced in large urban areas which have been condemned by my Republican friends. I happen to live in a city that is enormously diverse, and that is Houston, Texas, and we are proudly so. Houston has more than 26% of our Houston metro area GDP is contributed to by immigrants. $5 billion to Social Security and $1.4 billion to Medicare. And immigrants make up over 30% of the employed labor force. They fill labor shortages in the Houston market. And yes, if you've done the crime, I want ICE to be able to do its job. I see nothing that has prevented them from doing so. The poverty levels are not as high in trust counties. So let me ask Sheriff Batiste, I think if I've gotten your title right, forgive me, because I appreciate you coming here. Is the title right, Sheriff? Chief, excuse me. Let me ask you, if I might. We have sheriffs and chiefs in Texas. I know you do as well. Let me ask you this. First of all, we have accusatory commentary of Soros DAs. Let us not put an individual that is not here, a contributing American, and jeopardize his life for always throwing his name out in the most ugliest way. I am offended by that. Mr. Soros does not deserve that. He is an American and a patriot, and he also comes from a minority community, one might say, and you create a dangerous situation. That's unfortunate. But, Chief, how should the federal government help support these jurisdictions while also ensuring that immigration laws are enforced? When I say these jurisdictions, I'm suggesting jurisdictions who may be more prone for immigrants, in some instances migrants. How can we work with you better? Chief?
Chairman McClintock, Ms. Jackson-Lee, thank you for the question. I would say that the division of labor, the fact that the federal government is charged with the responsibilities of federal immigration should continue to be that way. We can work alongside federal immigration in situations where we're dealing with violent felons, certainly for the safety of our nation and our community. But the work of ensuring public safety in our neighborhoods and our cities day to day, that is our responsibility. And we can't be drawn into the daily issues of low-level immigration cases where we are more responsible to the primary public safety needs of our communities. The work of federal immigration and immigration enforcement lies with them, and it should stay with them.
If you build trust in your community with citizen, non-citizen, migrant, non-migrant, immigrant, non-immigrant, can you help solve crimes? Can your community be safer if people are willing to come and tell you where the criminal is?
Without a doubt, ma'am.
And that's how crime goes down.
Absolutely.
I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Dales.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Rosenberg, you've heard just about every member here express their condolences for the loss of your son back in 2010. I feel your pain here. I just want you to know that tomorrow, this week, I will be reintroducing the Justice for Angel Families Act, and that legislation would amend the Crime Victims Fund to expand funds to angel families who are victims of homicide by an illegal immigrant. And I think Ms. Jackson-Lee just expressed her sorrow to you and the pain. So I'm hoping that I can get some bipartisan support on that to help victims, individuals that have been murdered as a result of activities from illegal aliens. So hopefully we can get some bipartisan support on that. Thank you. Mr. Fabricatore, thank you for being here. The shocking decline in enforcement activity, my friend, at our southern border, must be sickening to a guy like you, a ICE enforcement removal officer like yourself. I can't imagine how you feel, how you feel having dedicated your entire career to enforcement of U.S. immigration laws, and then seeing what's happening today. I want to talk about some of the arrest numbers that we see behind me on this chart. They were pulled from ICE's own data. Before we get into that, I just want to let you know, you talked about detainers, ICE detainers. I was a sheriff for 8 years. I was in it for almost 30. As a sheriff, I complied with every single ICE detainer that ever came through my office. And now we had a few that didn't, and Texas created a law that stated that if a sheriff does not comply with a detainer from ICE, that they could potentially be removed from office, and I support that. So hopefully sheriffs have straightened themselves out a little bit, and they comply with every single ICE detainer. Can you explain why the number in arrests have dropped so drastically over the last couple of years?
Well, I think there are definitely a lot of different reasons. One, the priorities for sure, but also because of what's happening at the border moves into the interior. Sure. So every single state is now a border state. And ICE officers are now having to process those cases from the border at their ICE offices. So instead of being on the street making these arrests, they're forced to stay in the office and just process cases.
Got it. My time as sheriff, I ran for Congress because I was just disgusted what took place at the southern border. I'm going to highlight a few of the cases that I had. I had 6 undocumented immigrants burglarized 70 homes. 6 of them, they were undocumented. They were in Fort Bend County. They were in Brazoria County. We arrested 6 of them. All of them had entered the U.S. illegally. They were from Honduras and Mexico. What's interesting is that when they burglarized a home, you know who they targeted? They targeted Indian, Asian, and Middle Eastern communities. Think about that now. They targeted the minority migrant communities. They stole high-end jewelry. They stole money. January 26, 2017, we arrested 17 individuals. They were from Colombia. 120 break-ins, again, stole jewelry, purses, working with HPD. Sheila, we were working with HPD. Worked very, very hard. One of the individuals, this bad hombre, he was actually deported in 2014 and had ties to terrorism. He had terrorist ties to the FARC, which is a terrorist group coming out of Colombia. A lot of these guys have been deported more than one time, yet they continue to find their way back here to commit more crime. 3 of them had been previously deported. And this guy, I've highlighted him before. This gentleman killed a senior lady in my county, and he's from Honduras. And let's take it. So he's been deported 6 previous times. So we talked earlier, that we're going to talk about what's happening inside the country, right? But when you're in the country and you commit a crime and you're deported, how do you get back here so quickly? This guy came back December 2001, 2012, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015. They're back within several months, this guy, and he killed. So we have serious issues. Mr. Batista, I just want to kind of talk. I know Representative Nadler brought up to you about this white supremacist or nationalist or something, the domestic terrorist that killed individuals, shot and killed. It is horrible what happened. And he asked you, how has that affected the Mexican community? And what was your answer? Did you say they're kind of going underground, do you believe? They're scared as a result?
Chairman McClintock, Mr. Nels, that's correct.
Okay, well, how do you think the communities, the Asians and the Pakistanis and the Middle Eastern communities feel when their homes are being burglarized, they steal all their family heirlooms, right? They're here trying to live and try to come here legally, and then they are victims of crime by these illegal alien criminals. How do you think they feel? What should they feel? You're a sheriff or a lawman.
I think, Mr. Nels, I think we should all be outraged by any criminal
Mr.
activity.
Batista, they're madder than hell. They're madder than hell. And it requires guys like me and others to put these individuals, and it's the federal government's responsibility to keep them out of our country. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Ross.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Rosenberg, I too want to express my sympathy for you and for your loss, and my heart goes out to you. We should all endeavor to crack down on people who commit serious violent crime, no matter who they are or where they come from. So I'm very sorry for your loss. This hearing, and I'm toward the end, so I've gotten to listen to the whole thing, is yet another attempt to scare the public about immigration and immigrants. And we've seen with my colleague's chart and heard today that crime rates among immigrants, both legal and undocumented, are lower than those among native-born Americans. That doesn't excuse the crime, it's just a fact. But today, I want to do something a little upbeat. I want to highlight an all-American city in my district in North Carolina. It's called Morrisville. An all-American city that was awarded in 2021 and recognized Morrisville for its inclusive civic engagement to build equity and create stronger connections among residents, businesses, nonprofits, and government leaders. Morrisville was one of only 10 cities selected for this award in 2021, and it's also home to a thriving immigrant community. More than 35% of Morrisville's residents are immigrants, 4 times greater than the immigrant population rate of North Carolina. And despite what Republicans would have you believe about towns and cities with large immigrant populations, Morrisville doesn't experience high crime rates. In fact, both violent crime and property crime rates fall below the state as well as the national averages in Morrisville. Additionally, Morrisville's poverty rate is 1/3 of the rate in North Carolina. And not only is Morrisville a safe place to live, but its residents are also highly educated. The high school graduation rate is 10% higher than North Carolina state average, and the town population with a bachelor's degree or higher is more than double the state average. Morrisville is moving North Carolina forward and is home to some of the brightest minds in the nation. And it has become a tech hub for the Research Triangle. But you know, there's a sad thing about Morrisville and all these immigrants there. Because of our broken immigration system, many of the people who brought their children here have children who are aging out of the visa process, and their children will be what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle call illegal aliens. Kids who came here documented, but because of our broken immigration system and the long lines for getting a visa, at age 21, they have to self-deport. And it is about time that we stop vilifying all immigrants, claiming that they're not making our country better. I am here to tell you that I am so proud to represent Morrisville and the immigrants in my community. We need to focus on violent crime wherever it comes from. And we need to celebrate industry and family however it is celebrated. Now, I do have a question for Chief Batista. You've served in law enforcement for 37 years across 2 border states. Would you agree that the vast majority of undocumented immigrants that you've encountered are otherwise law-abiding individuals who want nothing more than the American dream?
Chairman McClintock, Ms. Ross, that's correct.
And do you think that it makes sense to try to deport every one of these undocumented immigrants, or would it make more sense to focus enforcement efforts on serious criminals, whether those folks are undocumented or documented?
Yes, ma'am, I'd agree.
Finally, could you just very briefly, we only have a couple minutes, discuss how reforming our immigration system by creating additional legal pathways will make our communities safer?
My experience, nearly 40 years, and certainly the data has shown that yes, improving and legally documenting our immigrant communities will make our country safer.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Batista, Chief Batista, I assume that the policies that you've advocated here today are the policies that you've practiced as chief of the Santa Monica Police Department since you took that position in October of 2021?
Chairman McClintock, yes, sir, that's correct.
Well, forgive me, but according to a CBS report from April of 2022, Santa Monica was one of the most unsafe cities in California. In fact, according to the city's first quarter 2023 crime statistics, crime's getting worse. Overall, Part 1 offenses, the most serious offenses, have increased 14% in the first quarter of 2023 when compared with the same time frame in 2022, when Santa Monica was already rated one of the most unsafe cities in California, 224th, I believe. So the policies you've advocated don't seem to be working.
Those statistics are correct as you've enumerated them.
Thank
Chairman
you.
McClintock.
Mr. Fabricatori, we've heard the discredited Cato study hauled out once again using the Texas DPS numbers. It's discredited because they didn't include certain visa holders, TPS beneficiaries, DACA recipients, among the others, which means that they undercutted the population of illegal aliens who were arrested rather dramatically. But what we've heard today from the Democrats is the same tactic they use repeatedly in these discussions. They love to confuse legal immigrants, who are the very epitome of law-abiding individuals. They have obeyed all of our laws. They've waited patiently in line. They've done everything our country has asked of them. And they love to equate them, these model people, with illegal immigrants whose very first act entering this country through the southern border is to break our laws. Would you elaborate on that?
Yes, sir. You know, as a field office director, my favorite thing to do would be to go to naturalization ceremonies and see people raise their right hand and swear allegiance to this country and become citizens. We are a country of immigrants, and we should do it legally, like many people have. When we allow people to just continuously come in and break our immigration laws, it's constantly getting worse. We can no longer get a hold on it. The border is not operationally safe. The interior of the United States, more and more crime is starting to be committed. And we need to do something about it. And we need to figure out what that's going to be. Congress can change the laws if they choose to. But we really need to get a hold on this because it's getting out of hand.
Mr. Rosenberg, did you want to add anything?
Well, I actually had made some notes, and the one thing that I was going to add is conflating immigrants with illegal aliens.
The Democrats do this all the time.
Oh.
It's so unfair and insulting to every legal immigrant in this country. I find it infuriating and insulting.
Well, it is, and I just wanted to, I know Ms. Escobar left the room, but just she made a comment about painting immigrants with crime, and what I think the correct statement is that you being the Democratic Party, you paint immigrant as crime by painting illegal aliens as immigrants. So let's stop. I haven't heard anybody here today talk about immigrants in a negative way.
Mr. Fabricatori,
you guys keep saying
I wanted to emphasize something. I would be sure that I understood you correctly. You said that if the deportations had simply continued as under the previous administration, there would have been 90,000 more illegal aliens removed from this country?
Yes, if we looked at previous numbers, if it would have just been, we would have been going in the same direction.
90,000 criminals.
90,000 criminals, yes.
But you also said 300,000 crimes?
Yes, because the recidivist rate, what we're seeing with statistics is there's a recidivism rate with criminal illegal aliens, and that's about 4 per alien.
300,000 more American families who have suffered acts of crime as a result of this administration's policies?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Scholeben, could you explain California's sanctuary laws and policies and how they affect overall crime in your jurisdiction?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, what we have seen in our state already is we have individuals of the criminal element coming to our state to commit our crimes. And what I want to be very clear for our office, we are not talking about immigrants as a whole. We are talking about the criminal element that is exploiting our border and our policies such as the ESTA program. It's those individuals that our office is here representing on behalf of victims today. It's because those individuals are exploiting those loopholes and committing mass amounts of crimes. As a quick example, per the FBI, the Chilean nationals that are committing the vast majority of crime in Southern California, 85% of those individuals have criminal histories back in Chile. Those are individuals that never should have been granted an ESTA visa in the first place. They're individuals that never should have been here. nor should the Colombian nationals who falsely claim asylum to only get into this country to commit crime. It's the criminal organizations and the transnational criminal crews that we're talking about today, not immigrants as a whole, and they are flocking to California.
Great, thank you very much. I believe that concludes the panel. Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. McClintock. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. We had Sheriff Daniels before this committee a few weeks ago, gentlemen, and he testified that the border had never been more secure than it was in 2018. He had never seen it more broken than it is currently. Mr. Fabricatore, why would people south of the border throw their IDs down before getting to the border?
They don't want people to know who they are. That's the exact reason they try to lose their ID.
So you're saying they throw their IDs down, nobody knows who they are, they come in the country. You know, in Prattville a few months ago, I had a 14-year-old girl that's alleged that an illegal drug her into a restroom and raped her in a restaurant there in Prattville, Alabama, in my district. 29-year-old, identified as an unaccompanied minor. He didn't have any ID. And it was found out later he was from Honduras and he actually had a criminal record. So you think they throw their IDs down so we just don't know who they are then?
Exactly.
Gotcha. Mr. Schoenleben, that's a Southern way of pronouncing your name. You mentioned earlier in your testimony that Chilean nationals are actually turning themselves in. Are they turning themselves into the CBP? Is that what's going on?
No, Your Honor.
That's close enough.
No, sir. Colombians are turning themselves in and claiming asylum at the border. Once they get into the border, they wait a few days in detention, and then they're released with a promise to appear in court, which they never do. And so criminal organizations are targeting that method of entry on purpose. Once they're into the country, then they can commit crime at will, and they're doing so in a fairly sophisticated manner.
So that explains the increase in break-ins you're seeing. Is that Colombians you think that are doing that, or is it?
Well, in general, it's everyone. Crime is going through the roof on all scales, both domestic and international, but that's part of our problem. We keep talking about the different groups that are committing crime. There's no question that domestic criminals are committing crime here. That's part of the problem. When we start importing criminals who are already criminals in their country, and then you add that to law enforcement, which is already at a breaking point, that's a problem. Quick example, Irvine, California, which is considered one of the safest cities in the country, recently for 6 months straight had to deploy detectives in overtime capacity to try to combat this very problem. And while they had streets flooded with detectives, they were still hit by transnational organized crews committing crimes such as residential burglaries. So these law enforcement agencies are already stretched thin, and then you add that element of exploitation, it's a breaking point.
We had a hearing in Yuma, Arizona, and the law enforcement agents there testified, or told us actually, during testimony, that they had 109 different countries come through that one small town. But the interesting thing, I think, was that the border agents have almost become concierge guys. They're not doing the job anymore, what we want, law enforcement going out actually patrolling the border. They have become concierge, and they're in processing people. And here's an interesting thing. Under this administration, they instantly can apply for asylum. So they get a cell phone, and then they get taxpayer subsidies up to about $900 a month. The thing is, they take our phones, but they don't take our calls when it's time to show up to court. And so doing away with the Remain in Mexico policy, they're throwing their IDs down, they're pouring across the southern border. And Mr. Batista, I want to mention this to you. Mr. Ray, director of FBI, testified in here yesterday that he was having a very difficult time controlling crime, especially concerning fentanyl, because it is pouring in across it. Do you think the open border, Mr. Batista, is making your job more difficult? Is that why we're seeing the statistics go up in your neighborhoods with increased crime?
Chairman McClintock, Mr. Moore, I believe that we need to have strong border security without a doubt. And I do believe that the influx of fentanyl is coming from different parts of the world and definitely afflicting our communities.
Interesting testimony we also heard, and you may have heard this, but what's happening, the cartel are actually allowing these people to become drug mules. And so they're coming, just south of the border, you're $4,000 or $5,000 if you're coming from Mexico to come into our country. You're gonna pay about $7,000 or $8,000 if you're coming from the Triangle Nations. Last I heard, Russians were paying $19,000 and Syrians were paying $20,000 to the cartel. But here's the deal, if you don't have the money, gentlemen, you can backpack heroin and cocaine or fentanyl across that U.S. southern border. So you're not an indentured servant or a slave to the cartel. You're actually now a drug mule. So the border policies with the Biden administration are creating two things in this country, either drug mules or indentured slaves to the cartel. And so they're making those installment payment backs. And so, Mr. Rosenberg, how many years have you been coming here hoping to get some resolve for the loss of your son? And you said, that's why I didn't offer condolences, because you said you've got more condolences than you can count. And you need actually some kind of commitment. How long have you been fighting this battle?
Well, I started in early 2011, mostly working in California, and ironically, mostly working on people driving without licenses, not an immigration issue. The guy who killed my son probably fit the description of someone who came here to better their life. Other than driving the wrong way on a one-way street, driving without a license, we couldn't find any crimes he had committed in 12 years. The problem is,
just took one.
So he wasn't a threat to public safety till he killed my son. Right. Well, but if he hadn't been here, it wouldn't have happened. And other than COVID, pretty much once or twice a year.
I'm running out of time, so with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back, but thank you for being here.
Mr. Hunt.
Thank you all for being here today, sir. My condolences to your son. I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
We are talking about the consequences of criminal aliens in United States communities. Take a walk around any large city in America and you'll see the devastating effects of these open border policies that we've seen ravage our communities over the course of the past few years. Crime, gang activity, drugs, just to name a few, but there is a far more sinister criminal activity that's not as visible as drug trafficking, gang activity, or just the general degradation of our cities. It's far worse, actually, far worse to me. It's human trafficking. I love my city of Houston. Houston is known as the energy capital of the world. It's known as a lot of great things, great food as well, but unfortunately, we're also known as the human trafficking capital of the world as well, and that has to change. I can tell you I'm very proud to co-sponsor a bill introduced by my colleague Sheila Jackson Lee. It's called the Stop Human Trafficking in School Zones Act. This bipartisan effort is necessary because that's how bad the problem is. This bill will increase the prison time up to 5 years for certain human trafficking offenses and sex offenses involving minors that occur within 1,000 feet of schools, within 100 feet of certain other places where children gather, like youth centers and swimming pools. As a father of 3 children under the age of 5, these people belong in a special place in hell, if you ask me. In 5 years, it's not enough, but it's a start. One thing that I do know is that if President Biden and the Democrat governors and mayors were serious about human trafficking, they'd stop their destructive sanctuary city policies. And you, gentlemen, have addressed this pretty clearly to me. Mr. Fabricatore, thank you for being here, sir. I met you earlier in the hallway. I have a question for you, sir. In your 23 years of experience working at INS and ICE, what can you tell me about the seriousness of child trafficking, what have you personally experienced as a result of the issues that we have seen with our open border policies?
Well, number one, I mean, they stopped the DNA testing at the border. So, we were testing adults to see if they had a DNA match with children. That policy has stopped, and I cannot figure out for the life of me why you would not want to figure out if a child that is being brought into the United States actually belongs to the adult that they're traveling with. But now we've stopped that, so now we're allowing these people to bring these children into the interior, and we have no idea who they belong to. We have no idea if there's a familial connection. This is wrong. And it needs to stop. We have children being brought in, and we have children missing right now. We don't even know where they are because they've been brought in and they've either absconded, they've gone off. They're being used to traffic drugs. Myself, in my career, I've arrested juveniles dealing heroin on jogging paths. So these juveniles are being used by the cartels to deal drugs, and they're being brought into this country. And the fact that we stopped the DNA program, this administration stopped it, it's unfathomable to me.
Do you agree that child sex trafficking as a result of this crisis at our southern border has increased?
Yes, sir, I do.
Without equivocation?
No, yep, I agree.
Biden's policies they've resulted in countless numbers of minors being abused and bussed across our border and sold into sex slavery. Under the guise of protecting illegal aliens, the Biden administration is in fact protecting human traffickers and harming God's children, our children. Now, many of my colleagues on the left may say that we are unfairly targeting illegal aliens and that American citizens commit crimes too. I've also heard racism being blamed and xenophobia being blamed, and I could tell you as a black man for a very long time, I am not racist nor xenophobic. I just want us to enforce our laws, and I expect them to be abided by so we could save our children. I've also heard some of my colleagues on the left say that the global sex trafficking of children is a QAnon conspiracy. According to the New York Times, 85,000 migrant children have entered our country, have been lost. They've been vanished. And where do you think they went? You know exactly where they went, and what's happening is grotesque, it is wrong, and if we can't protect our children, if we can't protect the world's children, then we absolutely have no future. I cannot thank you enough for being here. I cannot thank you enough for your hard work and your sacrifice. Sir, we will do better because we have to. Thank you for all your efforts, and I'm so sorry for the loss of your son. God bless you and thank you. I yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you.
Okay, does that now conclude our questions? I believe it does. Very well. And well timed too. I see 2 bells on the board. Thank you all for being here today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. And with that, again, our sincere thanks to all of you for making the trip here today. And with that, the hearing is adjourned.